In this video, we're going to take everything that we've learned from this past course and use Bootstrap and jQuery and Ajax and combine them all to create a full Crud application. Crud stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete, which are the 4 types of operations we can perform on any data. The application is going to use a pre-existing API that allows us to perform those CRUD operations on houses. So what we're looking at here is an example of the finished front-end application that we're going to build. You can come here and create new houses. So say my new house. Create that. We can see the house is created. Then we can either delete the house or we can add some rooms to the house to update it. So I can say room 1 is 250 square feet. Add the room, and there's our room. And we can go back and delete it, or we can delete the entire house altogether. So to get started, let's go ahead. I'm going to pull over my command prompt, and I'm going to create a new project in my project directory here. So make dir, and let's call it house, house project. Then I'm going to cd into my house project and open VS Code. Pull that over here. Now to start, we're going to go ahead and install jQuery and Bootstrap. So I'm going to pull this back up. I'm going to run npm install jQuery. And actually, let's start with npm init. Go ahead and just select all the defaults. Yes, that's okay. Now I'm going to go npm install jQuery and npm install Bootstrap. There we go. And that'll give us a good starting point. Let's look here and we can see we've got both Bootstrap and jQuery. So I'm going to go ahead and create our index.html. So we're going to do a new file, index.html. We'll give it an HTML outline there. And we're going to go ahead and in our head up here, right under the title, first I'm going to call this house app. Then we're going to go ahead and add a style sheet to a relationship to the bootstrap.css. So I'm going to go ahead and say link, and the href is going to point at our node modules / bootstrap, and we can expand this to see it goes into the distribution and into the CSS, and then we're going to want the bootstrap.css right there. So that's the path we're going to go to. So /bootstrap /distribution CSS /bootstrap.css. There we go. And then next, let's go ahead and create the body of what this is going to look like. So we're going to want to build essentially this new house form, and then have a div that's going to hold any of the houses that we create. So to do that, let's start and make the body a container class from Bootstrap. And then I'm going to create a div for the form that's going to create the new houses. And I'm going to give it an ID so that we can refer to it in our code. So ID equals, we'll call it new house. And we're going to give it a class from Bootstrap and we'll call it Jumbotron. And then in here we'll go ahead and give it a heading, so H2. Let's tab that over. And we'll say new house. Now we're going to give it input, and it's going to be type text, and we're going to give this input an ID. So we'll set the ID equal to new house name. This is where the name of the new house will be entered in. And we'll give it a class of form control. Again, another Bootstrap class for styling. We'll add a line break after that, and then we'll add the button to submit it. So button, and in the button we're going to give it an ID. That ID will be create new house. Class, some more Bootstrap styling here. We're going to say btn, btn-primary. And again, it'll be a form control as well, so it goes across the length of the screen. And the text that it will show is create. Let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to open this in my default browser. And we can see we've got this so far. So I'm going to go ahead and inspect it. And so we failed to load the bootstrap.css. So let's go ahead and see what's going on there. So we've got style sheet, href, node modules. Make sure this is spelled correctly. There's a node modules. Let's see if our that's part of the problem. So I accidentally created the index.html file inside of the node folder. We don't want that there. We want that at the root. So we're going to move that out. And now this should work. And if we're typing this in, we should be able to see it autocomplete. And that's much better than the first time we put it in. So there we go. So let's come back to this and refresh it. And I'm going to fix the URL where that's pointed. And there's what we have so far. So the last thing that we need here, at least in the HTML elements, is we need another div. And this div is going to be where we store all the new houses that are created, or all the houses that we read using AJAX from our API. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an ID of app. And that's where we're going to use jQuery to add all of the new elements to the DOM. Now, under this, we're going to add a few JavaScript scripts. So we'll do one script here. The first one is going to be jQuery, right? So source equals, it's in our node modules, jQuery. We want to go to the distribution for that as well. And we can do jQuery.js, or we can do the minified version as well. Either's fine. So we've got that. And then let's go ahead and do another script. And this is going to be the JavaScript that we're going to write. So I'm going to go ahead and call it index.js. It doesn't exist yet, but we're going to create it shortly. And then the last one is going to be some JavaScript that Bootstrap provides. So script source equals, get our node modules, Bootstrap, distribution, JavaScript. And let's do the bootstrap.bundle.js, right there, the first one. There we go. So now our app is created. We can come back and refresh. We don't see any change because we didn't add anything else visual. There is another div here though. If we inspect this, we can see our body. We've got this div, and then we've got this app div that is blank, which is where we're going to add everything to it. So we can come back here now, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. Right here, new file. This will be our index.js. That's linked to our HTML here. And this is where we're going to add all the code that does what we want it to do. We're going to create a few different classes that represent our rooms and our houses. And we're going to create a class for a house service that's going to enable us to send the HTTP request or the AJAX request to the pre-existing API. And then we're going to also create a class that helps us manage the DOM. So instead of just rewriting or repainting parts of the DOM, we're going to clear out the DOM every time we, or at least the element that we put all the houses in, the app div. We're going to clear that out every time and then repopulate the houses so it's more clean. So to start, let's go ahead and create the basic block of what we're building, and that's house. So we're going to create a class called house. And in this house, we're going to create a constructor, and it's going to take a name, right? We need to know what the name of our house is. And in here, we're going to say this.name equals whatever our name is. And then each house is going to have a bunch of different rooms. So we can say this.rooms equals, and it's going to be an array, a blank array of rooms. So that is the structure for our house. That's all it is, the name and an array of rooms. So let's go ahead and create the rooms now. So class room, the room is going to have a name and an area. How large is the room? So let's do a constructor, name and area, and then our simple this.name equals the name that's passed in, and this.area equals the area. So now we've got our two classes created, the data structures that are going to make up our application. Now we need to start creating the actual service, how we're going to send the HTTP requests. So we're going to go ahead and create a class called house service. In our house service, we're going to have a static variable, static member. We'll call it URL. And the URL is going to point to the API we're going to use. So the URL is https:// ancient, make sure I'm spelling this correctly, dash 31355.herokuapp.com/API/houses. So that is the root URL for all of the endpoints we're going to call on the API. Now let's create a few different methods to send the request. We want one for getting our houses, getting all the houses, getting a specific house, creating a house, updating a house, and deleting a house. All of our CRUD operations. So I'm going to go ahead and say static get all houses. And this doesn't need to take any parameters because it's just going to return all the houses. And I'm going to return, here's our jQuery.get, and this .url. That's going to be the URL right here. So we're going to return all of the houses from this URL. So let's go ahead and write a method to get a specific house. We can say static get house. This will take an ID, the ID of the specific house we want to retrieve from the API. And we'll go ahead and return our jQuery.get, this .url, and let's go ahead and just concatenate the string here. So slash the template literal ID. There we go. If we want to create a house, we use the post. So static create house. This is going to take a house. And what I mean by house is I mean an instance of our house class. So it's going to take something that has a name and then an array. So it's going to take a house. What are we going to do with the house? Well, we want to post it to the API. So we're going to return jQuery.post this .url and the house that was passed in as the HTTP payload. Now the reason we're returning all of these is because this service, we're going to use these methods somewhere. And wherever we use these methods, we want to be able to handle the promise that comes back. That will make this house service reusable. So right now we're only using it in one place, but if this were to grow into a larger application, we could reuse this house service anywhere we needed to access the calls to our houses API. Let's go ahead and finish it up with the last two, update and delete. So static update house is going to take a house, the house that's going to be updated. And in this one we have to use the Ajax method. So Ajax, and this takes a few different parameters. The first one's going to be an object. And actually, there's a few different ways you can call this. We're going to use the one that takes just one parameter, and it's an object. And the object has multiple fields that make up the data needed to send this request. So the first field is going to be the URL. And that's going to be this .url, just like in the other ones. And we're going to go ahead and concatenate the ID of the house that was passed in. So we're updating a house. We're going to grab the ID from that house to tell the API which house we want to update in the database. So we're going to go slash house._ID. Now it's _ID because that's the value that the database will automatically create for our house. We're using a Mongo database here. Alright, so there's our URL. We got to set the data type equal to JSON. We're going to go ahead and set the data. What is the payload? And we're going to use JSON.stringify. That's going to take an object and it's going to convert it into a JSON string for sending it through the HTTP request. And that JSON object, or that object we want to convert into JSON, is the house that's passed in as a parameter here. We need to go ahead and define the content type, and the content type is application/JSON. And then we need to say what type of HTTP verb is this request, and the type is a put request. So here, this one's a post, this one's a get, this one's a put. And that is our method. That's all we need to be able to send that request. And we'll troubleshoot it if we missed anything when we test it out. For now, let's move on to the delete method. So static delete house. All we need here is the ID, right? We don't need the actual house. We just need the ID to tell the API, because that's the way the API works, is it takes an ID. This is the house we want to delete. Whatever house matches this ID, go ahead and delete it. So again, we're going to use the Ajax method on our jQuery object. It's going to take an object. And in this object, let me do my semicolon there. In this object, we're going to say URL, this.url plus, again, the slash ID. And then the type is delete. So this one's a lot shorter than our put. There we go. So this is our completed house service. Now we're going to go ahead and use this house service inside of the next class we create, which is our DOM manager. And actually, before I forget about it, we do need one last thing on our house. We need a method to add a room. So I'm going to go ahead and create a method called add room. It's going to take name and area, and it's going to take this dot rooms and push to it a new instance of room. So new room and the name and the area. There we go. That way we can add new rooms to the array that's right here. So let's scroll down here, and we're going to go ahead and start creating that DOM manager class. Now this is where all the hard work is going to happen to basically repaint or re-render our DOM each time we create a new class. So I'm going to go ahead and say class DOM manager, and we're going to go ahead and give it a variable called houses, and houses will be used to represent all the houses in this class. And let's go ahead and start with the get all houses method. So static get all houses, and this method, as you can imagine, is going to call the get all houses method inside of our service, and then it's going to render them to the DOM. So we're going to use a little bit of top-down development here, where we're going to call methods that we haven't yet created, just knowing we're going to create them later to do what they're supposed to do. So here we're going to use the house service dot get all houses, and we call that method, and then that returns a promise. So we're going to use the promise right here and call dot then. When we get back, we're going to call houses, and we're going to, because this takes a callback, we're going to pass this into this dot render, and render doesn't exist yet, but we're going to create it, and that's going to be what manages the DOM, what repaints or re-renders the DOM. So let's go ahead and start with this one, and we'll add the get single house or the create houses, delete houses, add room. We're going to add all that later, but let's start by building out the render method now, so we can test this one. So static render houses. So it's going to take a list of houses, and we want to render those houses to the DOM like this, right? Like all of these houses here. So to start, we're going to say this dot houses equals houses, right? So that's this houses right here. We're setting it equal to whatever houses were passed into our render method. Then we're going to go ahead and grab a reference to the app by its ID. This is that div that we have right here. This is where we're going to render everything. App, and we're going to start by clearing it. So empty. clear it every single time we render. We're going to empty it and then re-render everything. Now we need a for loop to go over the houses and re-render it. So for let house of houses, and we're going to prepend each one of these. We could append them or prepend them. We're going to prepend them so the newest one shows up on top. So we're going to say app.prepend. This is where we're going to build the HTML for every single house. So we're going to write the HTML, but it's going to be in our JavaScript. So to do that, we're going to use a backtick and create a template literal. Go ahead and start that right here. So it's going to be a div, and we're going to give each one its own unique ID so that we can refer to it later. So div, got to pass in some variable here, the house.id. And then let's give it a class, and the class is going to be our bootstrap card, just for styling. So we've got that, and let's go ahead and come in here and tab over further. We'll say div class equals card header. And let's say h2. And inside of our h2, we're going to write the house name. So we're going to print out each name, or the name for each house. So let's do that. And I'm going to go ahead and close these divs right now. And let's test it with just this, then we'll add the rest of it back in there. So slash div. All right. So if we wanted to test this, we can go ahead and come outside of all of our classes and write the code that's actually going to run it. So I'm going to go ahead and say DOM manager.get all houses. We're just going to test this and see how far we've gotten. So come back in here, we can refresh this, and there we go. We have 3 houses that are existing in the API right now. If we come back and look at the completed one, we can see they're the same houses. We just have to build out the rest of this now. So far so good. We can open up our console, see there's no errors, refresh our network, no errors. We're good to keep moving forward. So let's come back into here and continue to add to our render method. So in the render method, let's go ahead and create a button that would be used to delete any individual house. So button class equals button. We're going to use the button danger class, so it's red. We know it's a delete, which is always dangerous. And it's going to have an onClick function here, and it will be the DOM manager.delete house. And that method we haven't created yet, but we will. And it's going to take an ID of a house to delete. So in here, we're going to pass in this current house, its ID. Now, anytime I refer to house, it's the current house we're talking about in the iteration, because remember, we're still inside of this for loop here. So that's how that works. And let's end that. Put our quotes over here to end this. And then delete /button. So we save that, we can come back here and refresh, and we see we've got these delete buttons now. Now if I click it right now, we get an error because delete house is not a function. It doesn't exist yet. We haven't created that. But we will. So before we do that, we've got our card. We've got our card header. Underneath our card header, let's go ahead and create our card body. So div, create the closing one right now. That way it always matches up. And this div is going to have the class of card body. Alright, let's go ahead inside of our card body. We're going to create another card, and that's going to have rows that show the room name and the room area. So let's go ahead and add a div class equals card. Close this div while we're here. Inside there, we're going to create a row. Inside of our row, we're going to go ahead and create 2 columns. So div class equals column small. And same thing for this one, div class equals column small. And close that one. Alright, so in this first column, let's go ahead and put the room name placeholder and the room area placeholder. These are actually going to be the inputs to to create a new room for the house that we're working with. So input type equals, make sure we spell that correctly, type equals text. And the ID is going to equal, again, this is how we're going to identify that we're creating a new room for this house. So house dot, I'm sorry, we need to do this, house dot underscore ID dash room dash name. So we're creating an input field here, and the ID of that input field name is going to be the house ID dash room dash name. So anytime we create a new room, the method's going to take this ID and know that it's for this house, and it's the room name. Class is going to be our form control from Bootstrap. And placeholder equals room name. Finish that. And I'm going to copy this, paste it right down here. And instead of room name here, it's going to be room area. And we're going to change this to room area as well. Let's save this, come back here, refresh, and we can see now we've got these 2 fields or text inputs for each one of the houses. So now we need to go ahead and add a button, and that button is going to be used to actually create the room. So we'll go here and say button ID equals, again, this is where we need to use the current house for this iteration. So house dot underscore ID dash new room. And we're going to say on click equals DOM manager dot add room, which we're going to create that method as well. And we're going to pass in the ID for this house. So that again is here, house dot underscore ID. Finish that. And we're going to give this a class of the primary button and form control, so it spans across the entire stretch there. So class equals btn dash primary form control. Go, and we'll just give it the text of add. Save that, come back here, refresh, and we can see each one now has the button there. If we click it, we get an error because add room does not exist yet. But we are going to go ahead and add that. Now, let's come back to our code. And the last thing we need to show for each room is for each house, are all the rooms in that house. So what we're going to go ahead and do, let's put a break line after this for formatting, and I'll put this right there. We're going to have another loop here. So inside of this loop, we're going to have a nested loop. So we create each house, we render each house, and then we need to render each room inside of each house. So we're going to go ahead and inside right there. So for each let room of house dot rooms. Again, this house refers to the current house we're looking at for the iteration of this loop. So for each room in the rooms of our houses, let's go ahead and grab the ID that we assigned to each house. Right, so again, here is our house ID. So we need to find that element, and then we're going to append, or we're going to find the card body for that element, because we're going to put them all inside this card body, and append each room. So let's go like this. We need to find, we're going to use backticks here because we're going to use some more template literals. We're searching for the ID, and that ID is our current house dot underscore ID. We're going to find the card body class, and we're going to append. This is where we're going to create some more HTML inside of our template literals here. We're going to append a paragraph for each one of these. Inside that paragraph, we're going to have a span that represents the room name and the area. ID equals name dash room dot underscore ID. And we'll go ahead and say, let's make it bold, so strong name, close that strong, and then we'll grab the room name, so room dot name, and then close the span here. We're going to do much the same for area, so we'll just change this to area, area, and area. And the last thing we're going to add is a button to delete a single room from a house. So button class equals, we're going to use the button danger again, btn danger on click equals DOM manager dot delete room, and we're going to pass in the house ID and the room ID. So house dot underscore ID and room dot underscore ID. And then we'll say delete room is the inner HTML of our button, and close that button off. Should be good there. Let's come back here and refresh it. And we can see all these deletes. Again, if we click it, we haven't defined delete room yet. If we click create, that hasn't been defined yet. If we click add, that hasn't been defined yet. If we click delete, that hasn't been defined yet. So we have a few new methods we need to define to make these buttons start to work. But so far, we've been able to read all the data from the API and render it to the DOM.